Today, new details about a deadly shooting in Columbus, leaving a young woman dead and her husband injured from a gunshot wound.
He posted a photo of her, big smile, the kind of caption that makes strangers hit the heart button without thinking twice. He called her his favorite girl, publicly, proudly, for everyone to see. That post is still out there. So is his mugshot. 48 hours after that caption went live, Lexus Antrom was dead, shot inside her own home. And the man who posted that photo was the man holding the gun. Nobody saw it coming. Or maybe somebody did. And that's the part that doesn't sit right. This is the Lexus Antrom case. And before this is over, you're going to question everything you think you know about the people closest to you. Welcome to Domestic Crime Ledger. If this is your first time here, hit subscribe and drop a like. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Columbus, Georgia, February the 12th, 2026. Just after 4 in the morning, most of the city is asleep. Columbus is a working city, military routes, regular people, regular neighborhoods. The kind of place where a quiet street at 4 a.m. is supposed to stay quiet. Gardner Drive did not stay quiet that night. Columbus Police Department got the call, a shooting at a residential address on the 4500 block of Gardner Drive. Units responded. What they found when they walked through that door was not a mystery. It was a scene. Lexus Antrom, 28 years old, was unresponsive. She had been shot. Multiple times. Muscogee County Coroner Buddy Bryan was called to the scene. At 4:50 in the morning, less than 1 hour after that first call came in, Lexus Antrom was pronounced dead. Her body was later transported to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation Crime Lab in Decatur for examination. Her husband, Kevon Davenport, 22 years old, was also on the scene. He had a gunshot wound to his leg. He was alive. He was talking. And he already had a story. Here is the part that stops you cold. Inside that same house, in another room, were 2 boys, 7 years old and 13 years old, Lexus's sons. They were home when it happened. They heard it. So let's be clear about what we are dealing with here. A mother is dead. Her children were steps away. Her husband is wounded. And his explanation is self-defense. 3 questions are going to follow this case from beginning to end. If it was self-defense, why was she shot that many times? So what exactly were they arguing about? And did anyone see this coming before that night? And why did it take until the following day to formally charge him? Lexus Antrom didn't just leave behind 2 kids and an unanswered call. She left behind a life, bigger, louder, and more determined than most people knew. And that matters. Because understanding who she was is the only way to understand what was truly taken. Before Columbus, there was Philadelphia. That is where Lexus Antrom came from, where she was raised, where her personality was shaped. Loud in the best way, expressive, the kind of person who fills a room without even trying. People who knew her did not describe her as quiet or reserved. They described her as present, the kind of person you notice when she walks in, and notice when she's gone. She grew up with her mother, Tunisia Seals, and her brothers. And from an early age, Lexus had a role in that family that went beyond just being a daughter or a sister. She was the one everyone called. Her brothers called her when they had issues with their mother. Her mother called her when she had issues with her brothers. She sat right in the middle of all of it. Not because she was forced to, but because that was just who she was. She held people together. That kind of person does not stop being that person when they grow up. They just find a bigger circle to hold together. Lexus had dreams, and she was not shy about them. Acting was her primary passion. She wanted to be in front of a camera telling stories, not just watching other people do it. Music was part of it, too. She rapped. She modeled. She was building something piece by piece, on the way most creative people do, without a guaranteed outcome, but with genuine hunger. She was present online, her platform, her brand, her voice. She was growing it intentionally, using social media not just to post, but to build towards something real, something she could eventually point to and say, "I made that." And at the center of all of it were her two sons, 7 years old and 13 years old. Every decision she made ran through them first. Where she lived, how she moved, what she was building. It was always for them.
She had a kind spirit. She loved her children. She loved us. She loved her brothers.
At some point, Lexus made the move from Philadelphia to Columbus, Georgia, away from her roots, away from her mother. That distance mattered more than anyone realized at the time. She built something real down in Columbus, a life, and a relationship that, from the outside, looked like exactly what she had been working toward. But the outside is exactly where Kevon Davenport wanted everyone to stay. Kevon Davenport was 22 years old. That is the first thing to understand. 22, 6 years younger than Lexus, and from everything he put on display publicly, he was devoted to her. His social media told a very specific story. Flowers, affectionate captions, posts that made people who didn't know them personally think that right there is a man who loves his woman. He called her his favorite girl. He said it publicly, more than once. And when Tunisia Seals, Lexus's mother, first met him, she had no reason to think differently.
He called me Mom, and he was respectable.
Not Mrs. Seals, not ma'am, Mom. And he made himself feel like family quickly. And for a mother who was already carrying the weight of watching her daughter build a life hundreds of miles away in Columbus, that counted for something. Tunisia was not naive. She was a woman who understood loss at its deepest level. But what she saw in front of her in those early interactions was a young man who appeared to be showing up for her daughter the right way. Then came the phone call. At some point before February the 12th, 2026, Davenport called Tunisia directly. He told her that he and Lexus were arguing. He framed it the way a concerned partner would, not aggressive, not alarming. Just a man reaching out to his mother-in-law, seemingly looking for guidance or understanding. Tunisia made a decision that any parent who respects their adult child would make.
He had called me in regards to, I guess, them arguing about some stuff that happened. And I try to stay out of my children's stuff because they're grown.
And she chose to stay out of it. Lexus was 28 years old. She was a grown woman. Tunisia was not going to insert herself into her daughter's relationship. She respected Lexus's ability to handle her own life. That decision would stay with her long after February the 12th. Here is where the picture starts to crack, because not everyone around Lexus was seeing what the social media posts were selling. People closer to her daily life, people who saw her regularly, who watched how she moved, how she carried herself when Davenport was not in the frame, were picking up on something different, something that did not match the flowers and the captions and the public affection. Not everyone who knew Lexus bought what those posts were showing, and one person in particular, someone from her job, knew something that Tunisia did not. Hey, before we go any further, drop this in the comments right now. Have you ever had someone in your life who showed one face to the world and something completely different behind closed doors? Because that is exactly what this case keeps circling back to. Tunisia thought she knew this young man. She had met him, shaken his hand, watched him bring her daughter flowers. And then her daughter turned up dead. And a woman from Lexus's job told her something that broke her in a way that grief alone never could. To understand what happened to Lexus Antrom, you have to go back 27 years. January the 16th, 1999. That was the day Tunisia Seals lost her mother. Not to illness, not to an accident. Her mother was killed by her own husband, and then he took his own life. Tunisia never got to ask him why. He never got to sit across from him in a courtroom and demand answers. He made sure of that. He removed himself from the equation and left Tunisia to carry the weight of it alone for the rest of her life. She carried it quietly. She built her life anyway. She raised her children, including Lexus. And she did not hide what had happened. This family did not pretend. Lexus grew up knowing what had been done to her grandmother. She knew the story. She understood what domestic violence could do at its worst. And yet, reportedly, Lexus believed her situation was different. She felt she would not go through what her grandmother had gone through. That kind of thinking is not weakness. It is deeply human. Nobody builds a life with someone expecting it to end in violence. Tunisia, for her part, never stopped watching. She was protective in the way only a woman who had already survived that kind of loss could be. She paid attention to who her daughter was around. She asked questions. She stayed connected even from a distance. And from what she could see, Davenport had not tripped her alarm. Not visibly, not in a way she could point to and say, "There." That is the sign. Then January the 14th, 2026 arrived. 2 days before the 27th anniversary of her mother's murder. Tunisia's estranged husband died. She was already in grief when January the 16th came. 27 years since she lost her mother to the hands of the man who was supposed to protect her. 2 fresh losses colliding in the same 2-week window. And then, 27 days later, February the 12th, 2026. Her phone rang before the sun came up. 3 losses in 29 days. And the last one rhymed with the first one in a way that felt impossible to process. The very thing Tunisia had spent 27 years trying to prevent. The very thing she had warned her children about, watched for, prayed against, had found its way to her door again. Here is what we know. At some point in the early hours of February the 12th, 2026, an argument broke out inside the home on Gardner Drive. Lexus and Kevon Davenport were fighting. According to Davenport's own account, the one he gave when he called Tunisia before that night, the argument was about stuff that had happened. That was his characterization. Vague, general, the kind of description that tells you something without telling you anything. What we do not know is exactly how that argument moved from words to violence. That part remains disputed. What we do know is the outcome, and the outcome is not disputed by anyone. Just after 4 in the morning, Columbus Police Department received a call and responded to the 4500 block of Gardner Drive. When officers arrived, Lexus Antrom was unresponsive. She had been shot, not once, not twice, 7 times. That number is important. Sit with it for a moment. 7 shots fired inside a home where 2 children were sleeping in another room. Now 7 shots at a 28-year-old woman who, according to her mother, was left to die right where she fell. Kevon Davenport was also on the scene. He had a gunshot wound to his leg. He was conscious. He was talking. And the story he was telling was self-defense. In another room of that same house, a 7-year-old and a 13-year-old, Lexus's sons. They did not see it happen, but they were close enough to hear it. Close enough to know that something had gone terribly wrong on the other side of that wall. Muskogee County Coroner Buddy Bryan was called to the scene. At 4:50 in the morning, exactly 50 minutes after police first responded, Lexus Antrom was officially pronounced dead. Her body was subsequently transported to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation Crime Lab in Decatur for a full examination. Davenport was taken to Piedmont Columbus Regional Hospital for treatment of his leg wound, and his claim held firm: self-defense. Here is what that claim requires you to accept: that a 28-year-old woman posed enough of a physical threat to her husband that he fired 7 shots. That is the version of events Davenport put forward from the very beginning. Investigators did not accept it quietly. Now I want to hear from you. Drop a comment right now. A or B? A. Davenport planned this. B. This was an argument that went somewhere he did not expect. Drop your answer. Defend it. Because where you land on that question changes everything about how you read what comes next. By the time the sun came up over Columbus, the Violent Crimes Unit had the scene locked. Davenport had a lawyer. And somewhere in that house, 2 little boys were trying to make sense of something no child should ever have to face. After Lexus died, Tunisia Seals did not go quiet. She went looking. She reached out to bloggers. She pushed the story onto social media. She spoke to news outlets. She wanted people to know her daughter's name, and she wanted answers that the investigation alone was not giving her fast enough. That kind of determination from a grieving mother sometimes shakes things loose. And something did shake loose. A woman who had worked with Lexus reached out to Tunisia directly. She had information, the kind of information that does not come out in police reports or court filings, the kind that lives in workplaces, in conversations, in things people notice, but don't always say out loud until it is too late. We do not have the exact content of what that woman shared. What we do have is Tunisia's response to it. She described it as something that broke her heart. Not the grief of losing Lexus. She was already carrying that. This was a different kind of pain. The pain of realizing that the person she had welcomed, the person she had trusted around her daughter, was not who he had presented himself to be. Tunisia's own words, "a wolf in sheep's clothing." That phrase lands differently when you remember who said it. This was not someone throwing around an accusation carelessly. This was a woman who had met Davenport, shaken his hand, heard him call her mom, watched him bring flowers, taken his phone call about the argument, and chosen, reasonably, respectfully, to stay out of it. And now she was using the words wolf in sheep's clothing. Go back to the posts, the flowers, the captions, the favorite girl. Now ask yourself a different question. Was that love, or was that image management? Because those are not the same thing. And in this case, the difference between those two answers is everything. The self-defense claim looks different now, too. If the man behind those posts was not who he claimed to be, if the people closest to Lexus at work were seeing something that never made it back to her family in Philadelphia, then the argument on the night of February the 12th was not necessarily where the problem started. It may have just been where it ended. The paragraphs get shorter here because the story gets tighter. Something was happening inside that relationship that the public posts were not showing. Someone outside the home knew it. And that person did not come forward until Lexus was already gone. Tunisia had been fooled. She said so publicly. But here is the part that does not let go. She was not fooled because she was not paying attention. She was fooled because he was good at it. And that is a different kind of terrifying. The morning after Lexus died, detectives did not wait. On February the 13th, 2026, one day after the shooting, investigators served warrants on Kevon Davenport while he was still in his hospital bed at Piedmont Columbus Regional. He was formally charged with 2 counts, murder and possession of a firearm during the commission of a crime. A bail hearing was scheduled for February the 24th, 2026. The legal process had started, but for Tunisia Seals, the process that started the morning of February the 13th looked nothing like a courtroom. It looked like logistics. Lexus's body was in Georgia. Her family was in Philadelphia. The distance between those two cities is roughly 1,100 miles, and every mile of it costs money that a grieving family moving through the worst days of their lives had to figure out how to cover. A GoFundMe was created to handle the transportation costs, funeral expenses, and, critically, therapy for the 2 boys. 7 years old and 13 years old. Those boys needed help that grief alone could not provide. Tunisia also took to social media. What she posted was not polished. It was not written for public consumption in the careful, measured way that press statements are. It was raw. It was direct. It was a mother's pain with no filter on it. And she spoke about her daughter, about justice, about what was taken. And people listened because that kind of honesty does not need to be dressed up to be heard. The community responded too. A balloon release was held in Lexus's honor. People who knew her and people who had only just learned her name gathered together. It was the kind of moment that does not fix anything, but it marks something. It says out loud that a life mattered. and then the cameras moved on. But Tunisia did not get to move on. She is now raising her 2 grandsons, the same boys who were in that house on Gardner Drive, the same boys who heard what happened on the other side of that wall on the night of February the 12th. They are now in her care, in her home, trying to find a way forward through something most adults could not process, let alone children. Tunisia's message to other women, stated publicly and without hesitation.
It's okay to leave. It really is. It's okay to leave. Because if you don't leave, you can end up like my daughter and like my mother.
2 boys lost their mother. Their father is in a jail cell awaiting trial. And the woman who spent 27 years trying to make sure history did not repeat itself is now the one holding them together. That is the part the headlines never stay on long enough. Here is what we know for certain. Lexus Antrom was 28 years old. She was shot 7 times inside her own home in the early hours of February the 12th, 2026. Her husband, Kevon Davenport, was on the scene with a gunshot wound to his leg. He claimed self-defense. He was charged with murder the following day. That is the confirmed record. Here is what remains disputed, what that argument was truly about. On whether the violence that night was a single moment of escalation or the end of a longer pattern. Whether the people who knew what was happening inside that home could have changed the outcome. And why they didn't. Those questions are still sitting in a courtroom. Now step back from the legal case for a moment. January the 16th, 1999. Tunisia Seals loses her mother to a murder carried out by her own husband. She never gets answers. The man responsible made sure of that. February the 12th, 2026. Tunisia loses her daughter to a shooting carried out by her own husband. 27 years apart. Same relationship, same dynamic, same result. 3 losses in 29 days. Her estranged husband on January the 14th, the 27th anniversary of her mother's death on January the 16th. And then Lexus on February the 12th. 29 days. 3 losses. 1 woman still standing on the other side of all of it, raising 2 boys who now carry their own version of that weight. Lexus had plans. Real ones. She was building a platform as Jumanji Jumani. She was chasing acting. She was creating. She had 2 sons she was doing all of it for. That does not disappear because she is gone. It just never gets to become what it was supposed to be. And that is its own kind of loss, sitting right next to the grief. The man she married posted publicly about how much he loved her. He called her his favorite girl. She is gone. He is facing a murder charge. And somewhere between that caption and that courtroom is a truth that a jury will eventually have to decide. But here is the question this case leaves behind. Not for the jury. For everyone else. How many people are living inside a version of that gap right now? Between the public post and the private reality. Between what a relationship looks like on the outside and what it actually is behind a closed door. Between a phone call to a mother-in-law that sounds reasonable and 7 shots fired before sunrise. Lexus's sons are growing up now without their mother, the same way Tunisia grew up without hers, asking the same questions, getting the same silence. If this case stayed with you, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Every case we cover on Domestic Crime Ledger is a real person, a real family, a real set of questions that do not get answered just because the news cycle moves on. We stay on it. That is the whole point. Share this one, because Lexus Antrom deserved more than a headline. And her boys deserve to know that people heard her story.